Hi, my name is Patricio Molina, composer and director of the Conservatory at the Newark School of the Arts. Each week, I bring you a conversation with a composer to learn more about their creative process, life, and work. Today's composer's guest is Dalit Warshaw, an internationally acclaimed composer, pianist, and thereminist. Dalit Warshaw works have been performed by numerous orchestras and ensembles, including the New York and the Israel Philharmonic Orchestras. She is currently a faculty at Juilliard. In this conversation, Dalit talks about the piano and the theremin. We also talk about her compositional process, current and upcoming events. All right, so Dalit, the first question for you is a lot of the recordings that that I've seen on YouTube of you performing. Are you performing on the piano, your own pieces? So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about how the piano influences your music as an instrument, and also you as being a performer.
That's a really excellent question. I guess it brings me back to a brief story about my origin, which is as a pianist. I started very early. At age 3 years old, I began reading music, playing the instrument. My mother was a piano teacher, and she was my chief musical educator, I think, basically until I began college. At the same time, however, the orchestra was always a huge presence in my life. I was brought up in New York, just outside Manhattan, and we would regularly go to New York Philharmonic concerts and the Met. It was just a part of my DNA. And my very beginnings as a composer, while they began writing for my instrument, which is until this day, I think for all of us composers who also play, it's the most natural initial way of expressing our ideas. However, we sublimate and transform it afterwards. I mean, that's part of the art and part of the immense fun, you know, of kind of jumping into the perspective and mindset and personality and limitations of another instrument. It's like another character. But in any case, I started at the piano at age 8. A conductor who knew my piano works had the gumption to challenge me to orchestrate a suite that I had just written, and then the conductor's name, by the way, was Edward Simons. I should mention him because he was a huge
I never heard of any conductors doing this. That's such an amazing.
He was a very, very special man and musician with an unusual, fascinating history, and he ended up living to 101 years old, conducting until the end. One of those musical spirits that have an eternally positive, excited attitude toward life, which I learned from exceedingly. But in any case, yes, he felt, why not? I could write for orchestra, and indeed, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to me. And so my mother and I were seated at scores, including Scheherazade, and pictures at an exhibition, which is I think the ideal way to explore this transformation from piano to orchestra, which is the approach that I have to this day. Really looking at a piece that is so innately pianistic, and to see how Ravel could translate it so completely that the end result, you can't even conceive of it as a piano piece anymore. So that was just the most huge lesson I could ever experience. And then just began this whole spate of writing for orchestra, which felt so natural to me. Now, back to your question about the piano. From the very beginning, piano and orchestra really felt symbiotic. whether I'm writing for piano, whether I'm even performing on the piano. Writing for piano, I always think three-dimensionally. I think beyond the scope of the 88 keys. The instrument itself feels like a palette of endless colors, like you're given these pigments. And I think the best piano music involves really hearing color, acoustics, balance, overtones. I have on the piano right here Debussy's Preludes. I mean, they are for me the ultimate of pianistic music, but also orchestrally minded music.
Yes.
So that it just from the get-go and until now, when writing for orchestra, I feel I come from that place. As a pianist, I was very fortunate to get to know early on Nadia Reisenberg, who was really one of the great older, old style pianists who studied with Joseph Hoffman.
Wow.
I mean, it's a way of playing where, first of all, there's such subtlety of tone, which for a future orchestrator, that is everything, to be able to really look at the score, but look from within it to see how every note, how one can color it so that it makes sense within the larger line, and the approach to inner voices. And I have to be honest, because I've been writing for so long, and I have many degrees, and I teach at, I'm in academia as well. But when it comes to the source of how I relate to the piano and to orchestration, it really comes from there. It comes from, I have the piece that I conceive at the piano. Always, I feel I have to have all the notes. I have to have the essence of the work there, so that then with the orchestra, it's just sort of enabling the needs of the piece. And that's sort of, I think, what a pianist does as well, and the bringing of the inner, the counterpoint that is sort of subliminal, that's not immediately obvious. So that's one way of answering your question.
Well, Dalit, very interesting what you're saying about the piano, because even though I'm a singer, the piano was my first instrument. And to this day, the piano is what anchors me in my musical life.
Very
I can go a couple days without vocalizing, but I cannot go a day without playing the piano. If I don't, I feel there's something wrong, missing in my life. I can't even begin to explain my attachment to this instrument.
Yes.
And like you, my mother was my first teacher, but she wasn't a pianist, she was an opera singer. And I wanted to ask you, what was it like studying with your mom? For me, it was an interesting experience. And I actually brought my mother to my voice lessons with Beverly Johnson. And Beverly liked my mother more than me. It was like an unbelievable experience. She was like, how did your mom do that? How did your mom, it was really very fascinating. So what was that like for you?
Oh my, how much time do we have? It was very special. My mother, I think she's a brilliant musician. She became a piano teacher, but I think as an artist, there has been such a wealth that she bestowed onto me. I was her special student. She gave up her others as soon as I really was very seriously composing. And it really was like we were going on this exploration together. It's not like she taught composition by any means. She's not a composer, but the two of us embarked on this adventure of discovering scores together. And I think, I mean, musically and spiritually speaking, we were sort of on the same level on that, in that regard. It's also very complicated to have your parent that close.
Yes.
And, you know, boundaries could be tricky. You know, so there's that element as well, but she always, I think, has been the ultimate musical friend and nurturer for just instilling me with a fundamental approach that then, of course, I moved on from. It was like an adventure. That's how I was.
You know, that for me, I have a similar experience with my father too. He's the one that you know, inspired me to become a musician. So, and same thing, you know, he came to my classes, my lessons. So, you know, we can all relate on that. Now, over the 30 years, almost 30 years of studying music, both in Chile, in the United States, I never met an expert theremin player. Never. And it's such an iconic instrument, you know, in so many of the greatest pieces written. So, you know, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into performing the instrument, and, you know, tell us a little bit about the theremin.
Okay. Wow. Well, again, I'm glad I already mentioned Nadia Reisenberg, because it's actually an easy segue. So Nadia was very, very significant in my early musical life. She passed when I was 8 years old, but there was always the promise that at age 12 I would begin to study piano with her. That never happened. But her sister, Clara Rockmore, the thereminist, she sort of took me under her wing, not theremin related, just as a musical presence and an inspiration. And we became very close just as a musician. I am so sorry. You forget unforeseen dissonance of life. But so at Nadia's passing, Clara assumed that role as a mentor and an extremely inspiring presence, and also that sort of emissary from an older bygone era, which I think to this day as a composer, I still sort of hearken there. And I would visit her for tea, which would be served in this very elaborate kind of Russian way. You know, she had an apartment on 57th Street in the Park Vendôme next to the City Hall. Yeah. Yes. And so when one would visit Clara, the table would be laid out with, you know, it would be an event, and along with her sister Nyuta's homemade piroshki, and we would talk, and there would always be in the background this strange looking structure that was like a, you know, it looked like a radio from the 1920s. And that was her theremin. That was customized for her by the inventor, Lev Theremin. And the first time I tried it, I was 9 years old, and I took very naturally to it. It's an instrument, I don't know if you'd like me to give you a description, or at this, just very basically, if I could try to be basic with this, it is basically it's an electronic instrument in which whatever object, or in this case, a human performer, is in the electromagnetic field, interferes with the electromagnetic field, pitch is affected and frequency or volume is affected. So scientifically, it's a fun and fascinating device to tinker with. But then if you apply a musician's approach toward it, you actually could create music while using this interference with controlling how you are engaging with the pitch antenna and volume antenna. Clara began as a violinist, a violin prodigy. She was in fact in the class of Leopold Auer in St. Petersburg, and at Curtis. Yasha Heifetz was in her class. She came to the theremin with that deep musical, I think, need for expression and brilliance, as just like her sister. Because of an injury to her bow arm, she ended up sublimating her violinistic tendency into the theremin and began using approaches actually much like a string player. She, for example, had something that's a device for finding pitches accurately, which we now call aerial fingering, where essentially she had positions, just like a string player would. You know, there'd be kind of the fundamental starting position, and then you would, you know, with your fingers, and vibrato, like with a string player, you could harness. In a way, it's a wacky concept, and certainly a crazy experience. You're sort of harnessing the air, you're controlling the air in order to create something beautiful and hopefully, yeah, just visceral and musical. And she performed the standards of romantic violin literature on this instrument. It is very difficult to get to that level of playing, and there's been no one like her since, even though increasingly these days there are some wonderful thereminists who have they each have found their own manner of dealing with the instrument very creatively.
Yeah, some of the performances I've heard on that instrument are so powerful, so expressive. I know I heard, you know, I was listening on the radio, the Carnival from the Animals and Sons, the Swan.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Cello piece. And I thought, you know, what is wrong with the speakers? You know, this doesn't sound like a cello, or it's like, but it was so expressive. And you know, it took me a while to figure out it was not a cello, because that's how expressive you can be with the theremin. Yeah.
Yes, and think about it. As a composer, it's really exciting to deal with this instrument in terms of all the timbral blending you could achieve.
Yes.
You start incorporating it into chamber ensembles, and orchestra is the ultimate. Yeah. So I wrote a Theremin Concerto a number of years ago that was played by both the Boston Modern Orchestra Project and the Albany Symphony, with Carolina Ake as soloist. She's a beautiful player. Could do anything I wrote for her. It was not an easy piece by any means, but composing it, I felt like I was in heaven. It was like being in this playground of finding all these ways of blending and doubling and integrating the theremin timbre.
Well, I have a question to ask you about vocal pieces. And of course, being a singer and someone who has sung a lot of contemporary vocal work of notable composers and some premieres, I'm always fascinated and interested in exploring and finding new works. And so I'm very curious about the letters of Mademoiselle C. How did you become familiar with the work and the life of Camille Claudel? And what led you to write the piece? I think you called it a monologue, right? Am I right? I think in the form
A monodrama.
a monodrama.
Yes.
A monodrama. You know, actually, I've sung a couple of pieces in that nature. One, you know, could be from the Diary of Virginia Woolf by Argento, which to me I've always considered, you
You
know,
know,
the
okay.
and
Yeah.
also a piece by a German composer. He's still alive, Ira Reimann, and it's actually called Melodrama for Soprano and Orchestra, and they're like mini operas. So I wanted to ask you about and your style writing. And also, did you write the piece with someone's voice in mind?
Yes, these are such excellent questions. First of all, I did. Yes, I had in mind uh, the voice of Nancy Allen Lundy, who's a beautiful soprano, brilliant musician, and I mean, her approach to any role or any piece of mine. This was not the first piece of mine that she sang. I mean, there's such she brings with it such psychological depth as well, such nuance, and actually the performance, the premiere of my Camille Claudel work, she performed completely from memory. It was unbelievable. Yeah, so her voice was entrenched in my head. I first was made aware of Camille's story when a long time ago, I think I was around age 20, and I was introduced to it through that incredible film.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yes, with Gérard Depardieu as Rodin and Isabelle Adjani as Camille. And seeing, I mean, this is a story that is very much of its era, and that you have a brilliant young woman, astonishing talent, who really was limited in her capacities for succeeding as an artist due to social confines for young women at the time, but also the very male-centric field of sculpture and painting and art and everything. Actually. I mean, this was fin de siècle Paris. But as far as visual arts were concerned, women weren't even allowed to take classes in the main institute because it was not proper for them to observe male nude models. So she was she was dealing with all these constrictions while finding ways, in spite of all that, to just burgeon in the most incredible, impassioned artwork that rivals easily so many of her contemporaries. And Rodin took her under his wing, and then they became lovers, and then he wouldn't, I mean, there was a whole, he wouldn't leave his life partner, and she had given up her whole life waiting for him. And it's a story that has been addressed numerous times, but what I noticed when I finally looked at it in a different way a few years ago, it's rare that her story was addressed, first of all, from a female creator's perspective. And typically she is depicted as a damsel in distress that is struggling against these powers beyond her control and these dominating men. There was Rodin, and then there was her brother, Paul Claudel, who
Claudel,
she
right.
was extremely close, and he started out as a poet, but became an eminent politician and I think a diplomat of sorts. And so her lifestyle and her increasing psychological instability was an embarrassment to the family. And so the family sent her away to a mental institution where she lived out 43 years of her life.
Wow.
I think a significant chunk of her life was in virtual imprisonment, especially when you read what the conditions were at the time in those places. And her doctors themselves would regularly tell her family that she's not mentally ill, that she is able to walk out and simply have a restful, stress-free, cared for life, but that she does not need to be in an institution. And her family kept her there. I mean, so it's a story about someone who just so wronged,
Wow.
but throughout her her life until her being institutionalized, despite all of these challenges, she was creating until the end. And there was I think the creator's portion of her existence was always completely lucid and on and strong. And I felt a few years ago, especially, it's interesting, I started the opera monodrama
Yes.
song cycle. I started it before the Me Too era. I conceived of it before then and began writing it before suddenly these sort of topics became really kind of in mode, perhaps.
Mhm.
And then Me Too happened while I was in the midst of writing this, and I thought, oh God, this is one of those inevitable moments. And it's a story that unfortunately is very, very applicable still.
Yes.
In the art world, in the music world. I think in the last few years, so much has changed to an astonishing degree, absolutely for the better. And there's so much more discussion about all of these, every element that it basically needs correcting. But yeah, it felt very important to write the work, but the impetus began before. And of course, as with every piece I approach, I mean, there is the personal element of addressing aspects that either might affect me directly in my own experience as a creator who happens to be female, or things that I witness and experiences of others. And it's my way of figuring it all out. And then the miracle of music is that whatever one's own internal process is, in the end, it's universalized and it's communicated, and then people receive their own, they're affected in their own ways, and then.
And you know what? It's one thing to read. Well, if you read a great novel, you humanize it. But I think that bringing the music, bringing the musical aspect to a story, humanizes the story too. And in a way, that's what. But anyways, we're almost at the end of this interview, and I wanted to ask you one question that kind of comes with two answers, I guess, or two questions.
All right.
I want to ask you, what are your upcoming projects? What are you working on right now? But in answering that, I would love to learn more about how you tackle new music. what are the ways that you do to get inspired? What is your studio look like? Do you still do pen and pencil? Do you go to
Yes.
the computer? So it's like a two answer question. What are you working on, and how are you tackling it?
Okay. What I'm working on right now, forgive me, I'm going to be vague because I think at the beginning stages of a piece, we're vulnerable. It's also kind of like an exciting secret, we'll hold on to it until we're ready to risk experiencing reactions from others. But I would say it's orchestra related, and yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that. As far as process, it's such I love addressing this subject. I do write by hand as far as I can. My initial sketches, I mean, here on I have my manuscript paper. They're sketches either at the piano or on the subway. I get tons of ideas. I carry sketchbooks with me wherever I go. I also, I'm not solo. I have a husband and son, and we all live together. And my studio is also our common our common space. So as a result, I seize those moments within, to be within my mind, often outside. I mean, I adore the subway and sitting in coffee shops and sketching, and usually my concepts more, or the conceptual aspects of pieces, and they occur away from the piano. I think it's important to have a balance. You use the piano for certain things, and you allow your mind to be freed, for other aspects of the piece. When I'm writing a piece, I'm sure you can relate to this. You're living it even if you're not composing. It's just at the back of your mind, sort of simmering. And you find solutions when you least expect it, where you least expect it. And it's a wonderfully exciting, sometimes terrifying, sometimes exhilarating ride. In order to have the right notes and to fine tune and to really sculpt, then I'm at the piano. But usually the idea has already been written elsewhere. I have tons of drafts. After maybe the first draft would be at the piano, with lots of crossing out and cutting and snipping. It makes me feel very productive to actually have scissors and Scotch tape and start, adding. But afterwards, then I do input my work into the computer. With the MIDI shut, I really try. I don't use MIDI except for editing at the very end. Did I cancel out that pizzicato? Are all the accidentals there? Because MIDI really, of course, it affects your ear. Even when you're aware of the limits, how can it? Because it's an immediate subconscious way that we react to sound and to music. Printing in software, printing it out and scribbling by hand, inputting another draft, scribbling by hand. I mean, so it's kind of, I use the computer like, I don't know, like I guess older playwrights used a typewriter,
Yes.
that sort of thing. Yeah, and then I engrave it. And but I held on to manuscript for such a long time. I think later than a lot of my colleagues. As far as translating the music to whatever medium I'm writing it for, I I always, and I have this approach with my students as well, I always urge them first to write the music, like in the abstract, before allocating specific roles to instruments, even if it's a chamber work. I mean, it's important to have the instrument, the awareness in your mind, and to write little notes, maybe where something would go, but really have the material be solid in the abstract, so that then when you orchestrate it and transform it, it's an enabling of what this creature already is. We all have so many different ways, and in the end, our methods, it doesn't matter, if there's balance and it works and all of that, but so when I orchestrate, the piece is already done, and I orchestrate away from the piano. I often, my last 3 pieces, I would actually go to Juilliard, where I'm on faculty in the evening division, and I just go to the reference room and I just stay there. It's quiet. You can't access your Wi-Fi 6 hours at a time. Just orchestra, and the orchestration process is very quick for me because I spent so much time on the material.
That's amazing.
Well, I hope we have time for one more little question. Do we, Patricio?
Yes, we do.
Well, Dalit, you spoke about some of these musicians, icons in the music world, like Joseph Hoffman and Nadia Reisenberg. And in my life, I found meeting people like this were so important, like my first teachers, Madame Frankel at Juilliard and Jenny Terrell. I mean, they did more than just teach. They inspired,
Yes.
and they introduced you to other aspects in life. And
Yes.
one was a person that was your mentor, which was Jacob Druckmann. So of course, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about him. He was my theory teacher at Juilliard, but it wasn't just about theory with Jacob.
Yes.
I attribute him to introducing me to the great Gustav Klimt and to that entire school of art of the succession, the painters, the sculptors, the architects. He was the one. And
Yes.
Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock was not just about theory, it was really about life.
Yeah.
So I want to know, I mean, he left an incredible impression on me. As
Yes.
a young going to school, I was like, wow, he's real, what a person. So, and of course, the two madams, Madame Terrell and Madame Freschel, who always wanted to fix me up with these boyfriends of theirs, who, by the way, in their 80s, they would take out their little black book and go, my love, he was a count in Russia. And I would be like, Madam, don't, please stop, Madam.
Oh my God.
Away. They would be chasing me down the hall. But, what was Jacob like as your mentor? I'm very curious.
First of all, you should absolutely write a book about your experiences. I hope you do.
I second that.
Yes.
I write a book. And every time it's called The Adventures of a Part-Time Diva Living on the Upper West Side, or What's Happened to My Top, which is the question all my voice students and myself ask me, like, what's the matter with my top today? And every time I think that's it, I'm done, something else happened, like the pandemic.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that's going to be the end and how we come out of it. Yeah. So, all right, so let's talk about Jacob.
Yeah. First of all, I just want to say I love that you mentioned this very, very important point that applies. I mean, yes, I will talk about Jacob, but it applies to, I think as a rule, these just connecting with these mentors that are so important to us. And when people ask me about Clara Rockmore, because, I was her student and I play the theremin. What was it like? It was not formal lessons. It's not like I reported to her every week for, a number of years, and there were set, a rigid program. It was really absorbing who the person was and the spirit, and hearing the stories and engaging, and I feel like I carry her in some way within me when I'm composing, when it's not even simply through playing. But as Jacob, I first met him when the New York Philharmonic played my second orchestral piece, which was in 1985. I was 11 years old. At the time, I thought it was not adequately representing what I do then, because I wrote the piece when I was 9, and I was already working on my 4th orchestral work. And Druckmann was the composer in residence.
Yes.
Zubin Mehta was the music director. And my mother had sent my score in to the Philharmonic, and Druckmann is the one who picked it up. And he changed my life. First of all, obviously, in giving me that incredible experience, and working with Mehta and the Philharmonic, and of course. But in addition to that, he was so generous with just with his knowledge, his time. I would visit him. I never studied with him formally until much later. I was at Aspen in the Advanced Composers Seminar, and he was teaching it alongside Bernard Rands. And that was wonderful, but that was years later. Back in '85, after the experience with the Philharmonic, he became one of the very few composers and conductors to whom I would show completed orchestral works, newly completed orchestral works of mine. I did not study formally during all of that time, but he always was so what a brilliant mind. It was so intimidating, never stopping. There's a sort of eternal childlike aspect to his character that was always very easily excited by, something musical that piqued him. And so I would show him, let's say, my latest work, and he'd look at it and say, let's talk about trombone glissandi. And then he would just randomly, not in relation to my piece, show me certain technical aspects about the trombone. And then we would look at a piece that he had just finished at the time. I remember, I think when I was 16, it was Seraphic Games. He had just completed it, and my mother was always there. He was very, back to your earlier question and what you shared about your own experience. My mother, she's a very charming presence, and he adored talking to my mother too. I would hear about his process for whatever he was working on at the time in a very humble, natural way. So it was really seeing a composer's very real experience.
Wonderful.
Which it was, and it also, in sharing that with me, who was so young, it showed a lot of respect. It made me feel very good to be brought into this world, and I think that was very important. He introduced me to Mahler when I was 11.
Wow.
I remember my mother and I were at his apartment, I think on 156th Street. I forget. But he sat with me and played me the fourth movement of Mahler's Fourth. And I think he thought I would relate to it because I was a kid. But, when you're a kid and you're hearing Mahler reminisce so painfully about childhood, and idealistically, it actually felt wrong. It felt, no, this isn't about childhood. This is very much about an adult who is pining. And I didn't immediately take to Mahler. And I remember years later, many years later, when I truly discovered Mahler on my own, and it changed my life. I think I remember saying something to him about Mahler's Sixth, and he said, "But I thought you didn't like Mahler," and that was a bit mortifying. But yeah, he was what an orchestrator and what a citizen.
Yes.
He would bring me to the new music concerts that were happening at the Philharmonic in the 80s. So yeah, I mean, so they were performing Stockhausen, bringing the American premieres of Berio, of all these pieces that for a young composer, my goodness, and looking at the scores too, that was more powerful than any regular kind of composition.
Yeah, that's amazing. This was such a great conversation.
I know.
I just I have like a very, very quick question, and that is that if I see you in the subway sketching your next symphonic piece, should I say hi or should I let you concentrate?
Oh, please say hi. That would be really great.
Thank you so much for your time.
So much doing this.
Really appreciate it. And I look forward to hearing more about this piece that you're working on.
Thank you, and I would love to hear your work as well.
Thank you so much, Dalit.
Yeah, okay.
All right, take care.
Great meeting you both.
Thank you for watching. This concludes our weekly conversations with composers. All composers' interviews can be found on our YouTube channel at the Newark School of the Arts.